It was the dead of night in my cramped little cell. Sleep wasn't coming, not with my mind running wild with thoughts I'd rather bury. A guard strolled by, face blank, just another routine patrol. I counted his footsteps, knowing full well it'd be a while before he came around again. 5 more days until freedom after 7 long months in this place. My brother David's been handling things for me, but I was still furious beyond what words could express. This place strips you down, makes you feel less than human, but at least it's not that nightmare prison up north. David's coming to get me next week. Last time we talked was behind a sheet of plexiglass and going on about how I should celebrate my first meal out with a big, juicy steak. He even offered me a spot at his place, saying Mom and Dad would come around sooner or later. My kids were staying with my parents. Ethan's got this attitude now, and I know I've got my work cut out for me when I get out. The divorce is done, but Sarah still owes me for the house. I'm biding my time, plotting my next steps. Life before all this? It was good. I had no idea what was coming. Everybody must have known about Sarah and Ethan, but no one said a damn word. I thought we had it all. 12 years of marriage, 2 kids, the whole package. We had a close-knit group of friends too, except maybe Ethan and Hannah. They had their issues. Hannah couldn't have kids, and she started drinking pretty heavy. One night at dinner, she got totally smashed. I ended up dragging her sloppy self off the dance floor and practically carrying her to their car. I told Ethan they needed help, but I knew he wasn't going to listen. Their problem seemed way too far gone. I gave it a couple months tops. Turns out I wasn't too far off, but no one expected what came next. 3 weeks later, the sirens started wailing down our street. Hannah had crashed Ethan's car after another one of their fights. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The next day, Sarah called me. Hannah was on life support, and Ethan was falling apart. I brought food to the hospital, tried to offer whatever comfort I could, but it was bad. 2 days later, they made the decision to pull the plug. Hannah passed quietly, without much of a scene. Her funeral was packed, everyone drowning in tears. Ethan disappeared for a month, visiting family to get away. After that, things seemed to settle down a bit. Ethan came back, trying to act normal. We included him in everything again, even tried setting him up on a few dates, but nothing clicked. 6 months later, he seemed like he was getting back to his old self, but something was off with Sarah. We were still close, but something felt wrong. When I brought it up, she brushed me off like it was nothing. I'll never forget that Friday, August 20th, the day everything fell apart. Sarah called me at work, saying the kids would be staying with her parents for the weekend. She asked what time I'd be home. I told her I'd make it back early and asked if she needed me to grab anything. "No," she said. "Just let me know when you're on your way." My head was spinning with a million thoughts after that. It was only 3:30, and I had another hour and a half before I could clock out. I started daydreaming about what kind of weekend we were going to have. I drove home carefully to avoid any speeding tickets, but still managed to make it in 28 minutes flat. I should have known something was up the moment I saw 2 cars in the driveway. One of them was Ethan's. "Hey, honey, I'm home," I called out, stepping inside. Ethan and Sarah were in the kitchen, both looking like they'd seen a ghost. "Ethan, what's going on?" I asked, confusion already swirling around me. Sarah's voice wavered. "James, we need to talk." "Sit down, please." "I'll stand," I said, feeling a knot tighten in my gut. "James, I wanted to tell you myself before you get served with the papers." I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. "Papers? What papers, Sarah?" She took a step back, her voice barely above a whisper. "Divorce papers." My heart stopped. "What the hell are you talking about, Sarah? What divorce?" Ethan tried to say something, but I cut him off immediately. "Ethan, stay out of this. This is between me and my wife." And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. I looked at Sarah, then at him, then back at her. "Ethan, get out of here. Now," I growled, my hands balling into fists. "Ethan, stay." Sarah snapped back, her voice suddenly firm. "James, he's involved in this too." I felt like I'd just been thrown into some twisted nightmare. "Ethan, leave now, or you'll be leaving in a body bag." He didn't wait around for me to follow through. He left quickly. "Sarah, we need to talk." "Now," I said, my voice barely controlled, anger simmering beneath every word. "James, there's nothing left to discuss. I'm in love with Ethan. I'm sorry." In that moment, it felt like the entire world shifted under my feet. "You cheating troublemaker," I snarled, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "How long has this been going on? Were you screwing him before Hannah even died?" Ethan froze in place, his eyes burning with fury. "You don't know a damn thing, James." "Oh, I know enough," I shot back. "While I was busy comforting you, you were busy screwing my wife. Get out of my house. Both of you." Sarah's voice cracked as she finally spoke again, but there was no pity in me. "James, this is my house too." "Not anymore," I growled, barely containing the rage bubbling under my skin. "Now get out." Her voice turned small, almost pathetic. "I'll get my things and leave." "Ibarka, leave now. You can come back for your stuff later." Ethan, trying to play the peacemaker, stepped in. "Sarah, let's go. We'll come back when he's calmed down." I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Listen to him, Sarah. By the time you come back, you'll be dead to me." They both walked out, eyeing me like I was some kind of wild animal about to snap. As soon as they were gone, the rage I'd been holding exploded. After downing 2 beers and wrecking half the house, I dragged all of Sarah's belongings outside, dumped them on the front lawn, and set the sprinklers to run for 4 hours straight. Then, with the front door locked, I drank myself into oblivion. When I woke up the next morning, groggy and furious, I saw her things had been taken. The anger and heartbreak were still fresh, twisting in my gut. I didn't bother telling anyone what had happened. I was sure the neighbors had already figured it out. I just wanted to talk to my kids, but when I called Sarah's parents, her mother shut me down. "James, Sarah picked up the kids last night," Laura said, her voice icy. "That's bullshit, Laura. She was picking up her clothes from the lawn. Now let me talk to my kids." Click. She hung up on me. Furious, I dialed back, but she wasn't answering anymore. With the rage building, I canceled all the credit cards and withdrew every bit of cash I could from the bank. Then I made myself some coffee, choked down a piece of toast, and started planning my day. First things first, change the garage code, get new locks, and move anything valuable to David's house. Just as I was about to head out, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw a man standing there, holding a large envelope. He lingered for a few minutes before leaving it on the doorstep. When I opened it, I found what I expected: divorce papers. The final blow. I called my brother, David, and his wife, Megan, to explain what had happened. Told them to keep it on the down low for now. Then I went straight to Home Depot to buy new locks. On my way back, though, I saw something that made my blood boil all over again. Ethan's car parked in my driveway, and Sarah loading it up with more of her stuff. I should have kept driving, but I was too far gone for that. Instead, I floored it. Tires screeching, I veered into my driveway and rammed into the back of Ethan's car. He was sitting in the driver's seat when I hit him, and I watched as his car slammed against the closed garage door. But I wasn't done. I backed up, revved the engine, and hit him again, this time driving his car right through the garage door. Steam poured from under my hood, and my engine let out a horrible noise, but I managed to reverse one last time. I floored it again, but my car barely moved Ethan's before stalling out. Heart pounding, I jumped out, grabbed my son's aluminum bat from the garage, and started swinging. The sound of glass shattering as I broke Ethan's windows was the only thing keeping me grounded. I was about to yank open the door and drag him out when I heard shouting behind me. "Drop the bat and put your hands on your head," a police officer barked. I turned, dropped the bat, and got down on my knees. They cuffed me and stuffed me into the back of the patrol car. Ethan climbed out of his wrecked car, shaking like a leaf, but I couldn't even muster a threat. Sarah was sobbing, talking to the cops, and staring at me like I was a monster. I smiled at her, a cold, empty grin. At the station, they booked me, and I was given my one call. Naturally, I called David. Since it was the weekend, I spent 2 long nights in that cell before I saw the judge on Monday. I pled not guilty, and the judge set my bail. David bailed me out late that afternoon. "James, they're throwing around terms like attempted homicide and assault with a deadly weapon," David said, his face grim. "I know," I replied, voice flat. "First things first, take me to the bank. She's probably drained the accounts, but I need to check." Sure enough, the cash was gone, but the CDs and bonds were still there. Too bad a court order kept me from touching any of it. I called Sarah, and when she actually picked up, I didn't hold back. You could have at least left me $5 in the account. You're cheap as hell. You know that? I spat. I needed that money for me and the kids, James, she said, voice dripping with her usual self-righteousness. Doesn't Ethan make enough money for you to bleed him dry? I've got a house payment coming up. Maybe I should just set a little fire in the living room, just to take the edge off the chill, I said, the words dripping with bitterness. James, stop talking crazy, Sarah snapped. I know you're hurting, but you're making this harder on yourself. Why can't you just accept it and move on? I'll move on when you send my kids back where they belong, home. Her voice took on that patronizing tone I couldn't stand. James, I can't do that, especially not with the way you're acting right now. I don't think you'd hurt them, but I can't risk it. When things settle down, I'll let you see them as much as you want, but as for you and Ethan, well, this is the last time you'll hear from me directly. From now on, you'll have to go through my attorney. I'm sorry it came to this. Sarah, I said slowly, my voice low and threatening. You have no idea how sorry you and Ethan are going to be. She hung up, but the weight of my words hung heavy in the silence. After my court date, where my lawyer pleaded temporary insanity, it didn't matter. I got screwed, plain and simple, by Sarah and the system. Jail time and half of everything I own went right down the drain. David handled my affairs while I was locked up, but when I got out, I came home to a trashed house and empty bank accounts. My lawyer fought to get back what Sarah had stolen, but it was too late. I fixed up the house, refusing to lower the selling price, more out of spite than anything. Reconnecting with the kids during our first weekend together was a small light in all the darkness. Life slowly began to find a new rhythm, with work and the kids' activities keeping me busy. People kept telling me to move on, let go of the past. But I held on tight to my anger, quietly plotting my revenge. 8.5 months after my release, Ethan's house went up in flames while they were all at a soccer game. Someone had doused the electrical box at the back of the house with gasoline, and it took out half the place. No power, no house for at least 2 months. Karma, right? The next day, 2 cops showed up at my door. At the station, they tried their usual routine, but they weren't getting anything out of me. I was at a neighborhood party with at least 10 witnesses. I said cool as ice. James, you were only a block away. You could have done this. One of the officers pushed, trying to rattle me. I leaned back in my chair, smirking. Prove it. When their good cop, bad cop act got old, I stood up. Charge me, release me, or I'm calling my lawyer. We're releasing you, but we're keeping an eye on you, they warned. Mentally, I checked it off my list. 1 down, 2 to go. With their house in shambles, I offered to take the kids. They couldn't stay there after all. 2 months of repairs meant 2 months of extra time with my kids. An unexpected bonus. Sarah showed up one night, seething with barely contained rage, to pick them up. James, I know you did it, no matter what the police say, she hissed, eyes burning with hatred. I feigned innocence, putting on my best poker face. I have no idea what you're talking about. I was with our friends. Too bad you and Ethan aren't invited anymore. Maybe I could put in a good word for you, I added with a sarcastic grin. Her eyes narrowed to slits. Don't bother. We wouldn't go even if they begged us. Well, at least you two have each other, and that's what matters for now, I said, letting the smirk spread across my face. What's that supposed to mean? She asked, her eyes widening with suspicion. I shrugged casually. Nothing, just saying you two are lucky to have each other. This time, I didn't even bother hiding the smile. The kids have been spending more time with me lately, and it was obvious Sarah and Ethan didn't like it one bit. I'd heard there were shouting matches at their house, with the kids telling Ethan he wasn't their father. Sarah had the nerve to accuse me of stirring things up. James, stop causing problems. I don't need you bad-mouthing Ethan to the kids, she demanded over the phone. Sarah, I don't talk crap about you to our kids. You're their mother, and I've told them they need to respect that, I replied defensively. How about Ethan? She shot back. I snorted. Ethan? That backstabbing piece of garbage? He's lucky he's still breathing. Besides that, he's a nice enough guy, I guess. Her glare was sharp enough to cut glass. He's good to your kids, James. Stop bad-mouthing him, she warned. Not gonna happen, I said flatly. He's nothing to me. and I hope I live long enough to piss on his grave one day. She shot me a deadly look, eyes blazing with fury. So help me, James. I cut her off, leaning forward. What are you going to do, Sarah? Cheat on me again? Divorce me? Throw me in jail? Ruin my life? Her silence spoke volumes. Oh, wait, you already did all those things, didn't you? You can't do anything more to me, Sarah. Go back to your husband, and just leave me the hell alone. Without another word, she spun on her heels and stormed off. I watched her retreat, shaking my head in disbelief. Once upon a time, I actually loved her. Work, on the other hand, was going great. It didn't take me long, just a couple of weeks, to get back in the swing of things. Ben, my boss, soon gave me for more accounts to manage. With no one else at home and the kids being with Sarah most of the time, I had all the time in the world to focus. I reached out to the clients and scheduled 2-day trips to each facility to get a feel for their operations. 3 accounts were a breeze, but TW Incorporated? Now that was a different story. They were in the middle of overhauling their manufacturing process, which meant monthly trips were necessary to stay on top of things. The person handling the process, Mark, knew his stuff, but he was a disorganized mess and had an attitude whenever I pressed him for critical data. Ben, if we don't get what we need from these guys, it's going to mess up the entire system, I complained to my boss. After a couple of tense phone calls, I finally got an intermediary to step in and bridge the gap between Mark and me. Enter Emily. Emily Turner, she said, shaking my hand when we first met. She had a degree in process engineering and had been with the company for about 5 years. We hit it off pretty quickly, and she made sure I got everything I needed. 2 weeks before we wrapped up phase 1 of the project, I figured I'd take a chance. Emily, I'd like to take you and your husband out for dinner as a thank you, I said. The Grandview where I'm staying has a great restaurant. How about 6 o'clock? She agreed. We shook hands, and I left the plan around 4:30. After catching up on emails and some paperwork, I headed to the restaurant. At 6 o'clock sharp, Emily arrived alone. Where's your husband? I asked, confused. She smiled slightly. Parking the car, she said casually. Then she dropped the bombshell. James, I'm not married. I blinked, caught off guard. Sorry, I just assumed, I said, glancing at the rings on her hand. She laughed softly. Oh, these? I wear them to keep things professional. No one hits on a married woman. Less chance of harassment. Plus, married people seem to get promoted faster. They're seen as more stable. How do you handle company functions? I asked, genuinely curious. I just say he's out of town on business or something. They stopped asking after a while, she replied with a grin. Well, you had me fooled, I admitted with a chuckle. We had a fantastic dinner, and by the end of it, I found myself opening up, sharing bits and pieces of my last 2 years, the ugly truth of what had gone down with Sarah and Ethan. I can't believe they did that to you. That really sucks, Emily said, looking at me sympathetically. I shrugged. Yeah, tell me about it. But that's all behind me now. I'm moving forward with my life. James, you're still young. Plenty of women would be lucky to have a guy like you, she said with a smile, blushing a little. Maybe, but I haven't had the time or the drive to get back into dating. I'm still cautious. She teased me. Well, you did ask me out, didn't you? I laughed. You and your husband, I corrected with a grin. Her smile was bold. If I hadn't mentioned a husband, would you have still asked me out? I thought for a second. Probably. You're easy to talk to, and definitely not a pathetic twit like my ex. She burst out laughing. I'll take that as a compliment. Dinner was great, but I left the next day, knowing I wouldn't be back for a month. Before I left, I asked Emily to keep in touch, especially if anything came up. We started talking regularly, with phone calls and emails filling the gaps between my visits. Gradually, I began feeling more comfortable around women again, even those outside my close circle. Every time I was back in town, Emily and I would go out, and after a few months, we started getting closer. Kissing, and eventually more. For the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe I was becoming normal again. One Tuesday night, after we'd spent some time together, Emily mentioned she had a conflict for Wednesday night. I didn't think anything of it. Let's plan for a whole evening on Thursday, she said, kissing me goodbye. I made a mental note to remember protection this time. Tuesday had been, let's just say, an oversight. Wednesday rolled around, and I found myself looking at the city map for new places to eat. After 6 trips, I'd already tried all the local spots, so I was hunting for something new. I found a cozy Indian restaurant about 25 minutes away and decided to give it a try, thinking it'd be a nice change of pace. I ordered a beer and the sampler platter, settling in for a quiet evening. But then I heard a familiar laugh. To my surprise, there was Emily, except she wasn't alone. She was with another man, and it was obvious this wasn't just some casual outing. They were holding hands, laughing, completely absorbed in each other. It was more intimate than any first date. My appetite vanished in an instant. I downed my beer, paid the check, and left, feeling like the world's biggest fool. She didn't look conflicted at all, I thought bitterly. After that, I avoided Emily like the plague. When she finally confronted me, trying to explain herself, I shut her down before she could even start. I got rid of one lying witch. I don't need another, I told her flatly. 3 months later, fate dealt another blow, this time to my ex-wife's new husband. Ethan was hit by a car that, according to witnesses, matched the description of my BMW. The police came around questioning me, but I had a solid alibi. And when Ethan finally died from his injuries, I made sure to attend his funeral. I spat into his casket, leaned over to Sarah, and whispered, 2 down, 1 to go. I wasn't done with her. I hired a few men to keep tabs on Sarah, pushing her closer and closer to a breakdown. I figured if I could wear her down enough, I'd get the kids back. The police gave me a warning about harassment, but I couldn't care less. James, what the hell do you want from me? Sarah screamed at me over the phone one evening. I want you to choke on your own spit and die, Sarah, I replied coldly. She hung up shocked. My plan was falling into place. A couple of days later, the police showed up at my door, but I was ready. You're late, I greeted the officers. Sarah had filed a complaint, accusing me of threatening her life. But I had already contacted my lawyer, who was waiting for me at the station. My client did not threaten his ex-wife, my lawyer told the police. He simply expressed a wish, not a threat. Unless you have a recording of Mr. Parker threatening to kill Mrs. Kelly, you don't have a case. One of the officers looked at me, clearly frustrated. Mr. Parker, why don't you just move on? She left you. It happens. If she snaps and someone gets hurt, we'll be coming for you. I leaned back in my chair. Is there a way to end this? I asked, turning to my lawyer. My client wants his children back, my lawyer said, voice firm. If Mrs. Walker gives up custody, he'll back off. That's up to the court, the officer replied. Then we're done here, my lawyer said, standing to leave. The following Sunday morning, I was sitting on the deck, having breakfast and reading the paper when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sarah's parents standing there, dressed for church. James, do you have a minute to talk? Her father asked. Sure, come on in, I said, stepping aside. Can I get you a cup of coffee? No, thank you, her father replied. So, what brings you here? I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. Sarah's father cleared his throat. James, we know our daughter made mistakes, especially with you ending up in jail, but she's our only child. We don't want anything to happen to her. I sighed. Look, I'm not trying to hurt her. She made her choices, and she's paying for them. But I want my kids back. They're better off with me, especially with all the bad luck she's having. I'd hate for something to happen to them if things go south for her. They exchanged a nervous glance, unsure of how to respond. James, we'll talk to her. But you know how she is, Sarah's mother said, clearly trying to ease the tension. I shook my head. That's where you're wrong. The woman I married would have never cheated or thrown me to the wolves. I don't even recognize her anymore, except as the mother of my kids. I want her to suffer a painful, miserable death. They left quickly after that. I think I made my point. By Thursday evening, the visitor I had been expecting finally arrived. It was just after 7, and the sun had almost set. I hadn't heard a car, so I figured she must have walked. When the doorbell rang, I glanced through the peephole and saw Sarah standing there, already fuming. Perfect. Come on in, Sarah. Want a drink? Maybe some hemlock? Or acid on the rocks? I said with a smirk as I shut the door behind her. Very funny, she spat, glaring at me. You really are a prick, you know that? I reopened the door with a casual gesture. I think we're done here. Nice of you to stop by. Have a short, miserable life, I said, holding the door open for her. She stormed out, and I couldn't help but smile as she left. I'm not leaving until we talk, Sarah shot back, walking into the living room and sitting down. Suit yourself, I muttered, closing the door and heading to the kitchen for a glass of wine. So, what brings you here? Our house, she said bluntly. I still own 50% of it, less everything I've paid since the divorce. I reminded her, taking a sip. I want it sold. What's it going to take for you to drop the price? She asked, staring at me like I'd fold. An act of God, unless you're willing to cover the difference, plus interest. I just want you out of this neighborhood and out of my life, she declared, her voice tight with frustration. That's never going to happen, I said firmly, leaning back in my chair. You still hate me that much? She asked, a tinge of disbelief in her voice. More than you can imagine, I replied coldly. It was awful how everything went down, James. But I never meant to get involved with Ethan. It just happened, she tried to explain, her tone defensive. Did she really think I was that stupid? That gullible? Nothing just happened, Sarah. What? Did Ethan hold a gun to your head? No. You chose him. You willingly destroyed our marriage and our family for him. Was the sex that much better, or were you just bored? My anger flared, the bitterness spilling out. It wasn't about the sex, James. He needed me. He had no one, and we just fell in love because we needed each other, she said, as if that excused everything. Charity work, huh? I shot back sarcastically. I needed you. Our kids needed you. Our marriage needed you. But you chose your broken little puppy over us. Well, now he's dead, and he doesn't need anyone anymore, I retorted with a satisfied smirk. James, you've become so hateful. It's sick that you're taking pleasure in someone's death, she said, her voice filled with disgust. I'd love to blame myself for the way I am now, but you and Ethan played a big part in it, I said, not holding back. That's a cop-out, James. You know 60% of marriages fail, but not every ex goes around hating their spouse, she pointed out, trying to make this sound like some kind of statistic. I don't care about anyone else's marriage but mine. She paused, then asked, How long was I the fool? Does it matter? I shot back, not really in the mood for a pity party. It matters to me. 2 months? 3? 5? I stared at her, wondering if she really wanted the truth. About 5 months. The first time it happened, I almost told you. I was devastated, she said quietly, her voice rehearsed. But you didn't. And you weren't that devastated because you kept doing it. How many times did you screw him in our bed? I demanded, my voice rising. Never, she snapped. I wouldn't do that to you. So, it was okay to screw him everywhere else then? I shot back, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Our so-called friends knew about it. No one told me. You proved to everyone that you can't be trusted. She sighed. So, where do we go from here? This house is our last connection, she said, trying to shift the conversation. What about the kids? I'm not giving them up. Nothing you say will change that, I said, my voice resolute. Sarah looked at me, searching for something in my face. I'm not going to convince you, am I? She asked. You got full custody because of what you pushed me to do. If I hadn't lost it with Ethan in his car, I might have stood a chance. I paused, then added, But Ethan got what he deserved. Now it's just you and me. Her eyes widened, a flicker of fear flashing across her face. James, are you threatening me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned in slightly, my tone dark and sarcastic. Me? Deprive my kids of their mother? Never. But if something were to happen, like a heart attack or an unfortunate accident, rest assured, I'll make sure the kids always remember you fondly. Maybe you should start writing down your last requests, just in case. I smiled thinly, borrowing the line from a movie I once saw. I'm out of here, Sarah said, standing up abruptly. She paused at the door, looking back at me. We had 12 good years. I'm kind of sorry it ended this way. She leaned in as if to kiss me on the cheek, but I shoved her back, almost knocking her off balance. Don't ever touch me again, I warned, my voice ice cold. You're an asshole, she said, visibly shocked. You thought what? That we're okay now? That we could be civil? You make my skin crawl, I said, eyes burning with barely contained rage. I'm sorry, she stammered, flustered and horrified by what just happened. Don't be, I replied flatly. Because I'm not. She walked out, heading down the driveway. I stood in the doorway, watching her go. "Oh, by the way, Sarah," I called after her, causing her to pause. "That look you just gave me? Ethan had the same one right before the car hit him. Too bad I didn't have a camera to show you." I shut the door, watching as she practically ran for her car. The truth was, I had started that fire at Ethan's house. 2 Gatorade bottles filled with gasoline and a lit cigarette were all it took to burn half of it to the ground. I made sure no one was in the house before I set the fire. My hope was that the blaze would go unnoticed until the whole place was engulfed. So much for that plan. It only took about 5 minutes from start to finish, including tossing the plastic Gatorade bottles into a neighbor's recycle bin. I'd excused myself to go to the bathroom, slipped out the side door, and cut through the backyards until I reached the rear of Ethan's place. No one even noticed I was gone. Now, I'd love to take credit for Ethan's death, but I can't. That was all him. Wrong place, right time, or maybe just dumb luck. If he'd bothered to look both ways like his mom probably told him 1,000 times as a kid, he'd still be alive. But here we are. No matter what I say, Sarah and her family are convinced I had something to do with it. And in a way, I wish I had. But I'm no fool. I wouldn't risk going back to prison, especially not to that maximum security joint up north. By now, Sarah's probably at home locking all the doors, thinking she's next on my list. Am I planning to go after her? Not a chance. I'm just going to drop little hints and let innuendos eat at her until she breaks. The goal is to drive her crazy enough that the court gives me back my kids. I will, however, make sure any potential buyer knows about the neighborhood arsonist who's still out there somewhere. You see, I actually like living right where I am, especially with my 2 kids just a few blocks away. Who knows? Once they hit 13, they might decide to live with their old man full-time. A guy can hope, right? The only good thing that's come out of all this mess is meeting someone I think I might have a real future with. Her name's Nina, and she works for the State Department of Corrections. Funny how that happens, right? I had to check in with her during the first year after my release, just to make sure I was adjusting, rehabilitated, and staying out of trouble. Nina's tough, doesn't take any crap, and honestly, I respect that. Once we got through the formalities, we started talking, and it turned out we had a lot in common. There was chemistry there, real feelings. But, ethically, she couldn't date me until my probation was up. The second it was over, though, we went out on a proper date. I laid it all out for her, told her about my trust issues, and she hit me back by telling me that most convicts lie to her one way or another. So here we are, both of us trying to move forward and deal with our own trust problems while getting to know each other. Nina really made me stop and think about everything I've been doing since Sarah walked out. She showed me that my actions, the bitterness, the need for revenge, were keeping me from living a real life, from having any kind of meaningful relationship. She told me straight up that it was time to move on, and she didn't mince words when she warned me. If I screwed up again and ended up back in jail, my ass was hers to deal with. And, "Darling, you wouldn't wish that on your worst enemy," she said with a smile that sent chills down my spine. And you know what? I believe her. I really do. Being with Nina keeps things interesting. And as tough as I think I am, she's one woman I'd never cross. But the best part is, I know in my heart she'd never cross me either. I think I'm finally ready to move on with my life and open myself up to love again.